Welcome to the Lawyer Show. I am your lawyer, Jeremy Rosenthal, and today also your lawyer is Josh Schneiderman, who's joining us from Los Angeles, California today. But today on the Lawyer Show, as we always do on the Lawyer Show, this is a show about lawyers, for people who want to kind of look in and see what lawyers do. There's a lot of name dropping. There's a lot of storytelling. There's a lot of tall tales that we talk that get better over time. About how wonderful we are. The main topic of the Lawyer Show, of course, is my phone number and how you can hire me on your cases. Also, today, I'm very excited to introduce our guest, Josh Schneiderman. Josh has, and I've been looking forward today for a long time, which is not the case on the vast majority of the shows. Most of the shows, no, I shouldn't say that I shouldn't be mean. No, I love every one of them, but this one's particularly exciting because Josh is a Los Angeles attorney. He works at a law firm that's called Snell and Wilmer, and Josh is what's called a transactional lawyer. We don't get a lot of transactional lawyers on the show; they avoid me. And Josh has got a very just a no other way to put it than just a 21st century practice. And I'm going to let him get into that because Josh works a lot in the cannabis industry, which is perfectly legal in the state of California. And so he's a member of the Snell and Wilmer firm's corporate and securities group. I would read the entire biography for Josh, but that would just cause me to call him sir and get nervous while talking to him. And we've only got an hour. So I'm going to let Josh introduce himself. Josh, tell us who you are.
Hey, thanks, Jeremy. I really appreciate you having me on, and I'm looking forward to this. And it doesn't surprise me that you don't have many transactional attorneys on, because a lot of us became transactional attorneys because public speaking is not our thing. But we'll try to get through this today. Josh Schneiderman. I am a corporate and securities attorney with Snell and Wilmer. We're a Phoenix-based firm with offices throughout the Western U.S. and in Mexico. We've got about 450 attorneys. We're a full-service firm. I'm in the corporate securities group. My practice is predominantly mergers and acquisitions and capital raising transactions. So I work with a lot of tech companies raising capital from venture capital funds. I work with a lot of private companies that are going through exit transactions. So they're being acquired by other private companies or public companies or private equity firms. And I run the firm's cannabis practice. A lot of my work in the cannabis space is regulatory, so helping companies set up in California and get proper licenses and help them raise capital. I don't help them find capital, but I help them comply with securities laws when they do. And when they get large enough to go through some type of exit transaction or seek to go public in Canada, which for the time being is really the only option for the capital markets in the cannabis space, I help them with that as well.
So I've been overly pimping your appearance on the show, and I think a lot of the hardcore lawyer show fans out there sort of expected Willie Nelson or somebody who looked like Willie to come on here, but that's not who you are. Talk about how you got into this space. Talk about how you got into this area of practice.
Well, I did. I mean, we were kidding before we got on, but I did dress up for this this occasion. We're still in Los Angeles. We still can't go into our offices, so I'm working from home, and wearing a polo shirt is about as fancy as I get these days. So, and this would be overdressed when I go visit a lot of my clients who are in the cannabis space.
I have a lot of clients in the cannabis space as well, but there's some major differences in my criminal defense practice and how you do it. But anyway, go ahead.
I'd imagine they would agree that I'm overdressed.
Yeah, that's right.
So, in connection with my corporate practice, probably about 7 years ago, I represented a company that had a proprietary technology. They developed a lighting system that had sensors attached to these lights that purported to take feedback from plants to optimize their growing conditions. And well, in theory, you could use it to grow parsley or oregano. In practice, it was really only useful in indoor growing cannabis cultivation operations. So I represented them. We did a little bit of IP work for them. I did a little bit of corporate work for them. And then over the years, they would come to me periodically with one-off questions. All of their questions related to the fact that the counterparty to transactions that they were entering into were cannabis businesses. So, you know, they would say, well, if the counterparty defaults on this contract, what are our remedies? And, you know, we look into that and kind of advise them on that. And then as things go with, you know, larger firms over the course of the years, every month or so, a firm-wide email would go out that says, hey, you got a client that, you know, is looking at entering into a contract with a cannabis company. Anyone have experience in that? And those would be funneled to me based on that, you know, that one client. And and then when California was looking to legalize recreational, I mean, we've had medicinal legal to some extent for over 20 years, but when we were looking to legalize recreational a couple of years ago, I approached the firm's executive committee and chatted with them about potentially, you know, really kind of embracing this practice. And it was probably about a 6-month practice, you know, experience of risk analysis, chatting with our malpractice insurer to make sure they continue to insure us, chatting with our bank and figuring out, hey, if we've got clients, we're going to pay us in cash. Will you accept it? Are you going to shut down our bank accounts? You know, will that ruin, you know, what the other 450 attorneys do in the firm? So after about 6 months of kind of doing some homework on that, we got comfortable with it and really kind of dove full in, and it's been great. It's been about 3.5 years now that we've been really working in that space pretty actively.
So let's skip because you know, I'm not too familiar with you know, Texas. Marijuana is still illegal here. You know, I think they've just recently enacted some medicinal things. But you know, motion of the ocean type stuff, I think it's coming here. What and you may not know this, but what happened our legislature meets every 2 years, and the last legislative session, they passed a bill. The Texas House actually passed overwhelmingly a bill to reduce it to essentially a traffic ticket, basic possession, I think, under 2 ounces to a traffic ticket, and the governor had actually fully supported it. The lieutenant governor who manages the Texas Senate killed it, and so he's kind of drawn a hard line on it. So who knows if and when it's coming, but in Texas it's not quite here yet. My question to you, you know, because again, you know, you sent me a list of really a handful of hot topics, and this one was kind of more towards the end, but the banking thing has always fascinated me because, you know, this is something that is still illegal under federal law, right? And so when somebody who's legally selling under the state of California is collecting cash for that, right? You can make the argument that's drug money. Yeah. And you know, to your point, there's no way that a law firm your size and with your sophistication there's no way they're going to do that without, you know, measuring twice and cutting once, right? They're going to be, and you were saying 6 months essentially of due diligence. Talk a little bit about that process. Talk a little bit about the banking and some of the banking quirks, particularly when it comes to cash.
Okay. Well, yeah, it still is a heavily cash-based business. There are a number of bills that have been floating in Congress for years now. There's one called the Safe Banking Act that, I don't know, it's probably on its 8th or 9th iteration going through Congress that just hasn't been able to get through quite yet. That would fully legalize at least banks operating in the space and accepting deposits. Where things stand right now, you know, cannabis is or at least marijuana is a Schedule I controlled substance under the Federal Controlled Substances Act, so it's illegal from a federal perspective, which creates all sorts of problems. There is some guidance out there from FinCEN, which is Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. It's a division of the U.S. Department of Treasury that has issued some guidance, and what that guidance effectively says is, in not so many words, we think banks can bank this industry, but if they're going to bank the industry, they've got to do all sorts of due diligence. They can only do it in a state with a robust regulatory enforcement environment. The bank itself has to conduct tremendous due diligence. It's still going to have to file reports with the federal government saying, hey, we accepted deposits from this customer. We've done our due diligence. We think they're compliant with local and state laws. So there are a handful of financial institutions, mainly credit unions, that have looked at that guidance and said, you know what, we're comfortable banking this. Now, there's probably a couple hundred throughout the country, and none of them are the big national banks. Big national banks look at it and go, well, we've got to do, the risk is on us, right? We've got to go conduct audits and make sure that our depositors are complying with state and local regulations in the conduct of their cannabis operations. We're a bank. We know how to accept money and we know how to manage that, but we don't know how to send people out to a cultivation facility and make sure that they're actually complying with the state of California's, cannabis regulations, let alone, let's just say it's in the city of Oakland's cannabis regulations. Do they have security cameras where you need to have them? Is their canopy size the right size? And those are all the sorts of things that are regulated here. Are they composting materials that they're not, selling in the right way? So a bank's just not really equipped for that. So the challenge you come across is the vast majority of banks don't want to take that risk. There are a handful of credit unions that do, and for those that do, the fees are exorbitant. So it could cost you into the six figures to pay for the privilege of depositing cash. And those financial institutions frequently change their mind as to their comfort level being in the space and close accounts fairly regularly. So banking is still a major problem. Theoretically, a bank could decide, you know what, we are going to comply with the FinCEN guidance. We are going to invest the capital to build up a team to bank this industry. But for for Bank of America, for Wells Fargo, it's not worth the risk. I think that's the analysis that they've done. For a small upstart credit union who says, well, here's a great chance to build our deposit base, it works great. And even the credit unions that are doing it, I mean, these are deposit relationships. They're still not going to loan money to cannabis companies. In terms of getting financing, that's going to have to come from the private markets, private lenders. But yeah, banking is still a big challenge in the industry, and so security is a big challenge in the industry.
You are watching JP, Kathy, and the Crew Network. You can watch JP, Kathy, and the Crew between 7:30 and 9 Monday, Wednesday, Friday. You're watching The Lawyer Show. I am, and Josh is today your lawyer. You can catch us noon to 1 every Thursday, and in California, West Coast time from 10 to 11. Yeah. So
what it looks like on my computer right now. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So, picking up on that note. So basically what you're saying is, for the big banks, the juice, as they would say here in Texas, the juice isn't worth the squeeze, right?
Right.
And even then, the smaller banks are still not lending these operations money. They're just talking about, we got to do all these 18,000 things just to accept a deposit, right?
And if we do them wrong, we lose our license. So
Yeah.
Why do we want to take that risk? We've got all these other customers out here who are great, and there's so many other industries. But yes.
Okay. And so let's talk about, let's kind of back up, talk about the difference between CBD and cannabis. And I'll tell you a bit here too, because Texas, and Texas actually sort of in a way almost accidentally legalized marijuana through a farm bill the last legislative session. What they did, and I don't know where California is on this. I think this is where you're going. But Texas redefined hemp in a farming bill as anything that has 0.3% THC or less, which effectively, in my mind, and tell me if I'm wrong, legalized CBD and other CBD-related products. The problem is, in a criminal case, we have what's called the corpus delicti rule, which means that they have to prove up the marijuana. They have to prove up the nature of the drug, and they can't do that by sight and smell only anymore. They've got to test it for the value. And that, you want to talk about the juice not being worth the squeeze, there's a lot of counties in Texas who said, we're not paying labs to do that. So they're basically not arresting for misdemeanor marijuana cases anymore in certain counties, Dallas and Denton being a couple of them in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex. At some point, we're going to get Josh out here. By the way, I know Josh because he's married to my cousin, and Josh's dad and my mom go back a way long ways in many real estate shenanigans in California back from the 1970s and 1980s. But we're not going to go there today. There's not enough time. I think I asked a question at some point in there. Really,
Yeah,
I like talking, but.
Yeah. All right. Well, let me jump in because I
Yeah.
do want to clarify something.
Yeah.
So you said, what's the difference between CBD and cannabis?
Right.
So I just want to make sure we get terminology kind of
Sure.
straight. So cannabis or cannabis sativa L is a species of plant, and within that species of plant, there is, I think, for practical purposes, two categorizations. There is industrial hemp or marijuana. And under federal law, marijuana is anything with more than a 0.3% THC content on a dry weight basis. Anything below that is considered industrial hemp. Now, cannabis has a number of cannabinoids within it, which are kind of the chemical compounds within cannabis. One of those is THC. So THC is the only one that produces a C4 effect. And so if you've got more than 0.3% THC on a dry weight basis, you're classified as marijuana. CBD is another cannabinoid. And so CBD is found in marijuana. It's found in industrial hemp. There are other cannabinoids like CBG, but CBD is the one that we most commonly refer to. But you do need to kind of classify it. You go, if you're going to break this down into a chart, at the very top is cannabis, and two categories of cannabis, either marijuana, because it's got 0.3% THC or greater, or less than that is hemp, and then within hemp there are a number of cannabinoids, but CBD is the most popular one. But yeah, when we talk about the Farm Bill, I mean, it sounds like Texas is kind of following the path of the federal government to some extent. So in December of 2018, Congress passed the 2018 Farm Bill, and the 2018 Farm Bill removed hemp from being classified as a Schedule I controlled substance. So it effectively legalized hemp, but it didn't solve some of the problems that we have, and I think this is probably what Texas is grappling with, which is, okay, it legalized growing hemp, assuming you do it in accordance with a state program that's been approved by the USDA, but it didn't solve the problem of, well, what when you extract CBD oil from hemp and you put it into products that are consumed into the human body, because there are other government agencies that regulate that. The main one being the FDA, and the FDA's position is, hey, until Congress acts, our perspective is you cannot put CBD into products that are ingested into the human body. So we've got this weird situation right now where you can legally grow industrial hemp. You can sell hemp hemp can actually be used. Industrial hemp can actually be used as a substitute for plastic. It's actually a very durable fiber. You can extract CBD oil, so the extraction process is legal. But the minute you put it into something that the FDA has jurisdiction over, like supplements and food, you've got a big problem. And so, yeah, you probably see all over the place. I mean, there was a period of time when you can go into CVS or Walgreens and you'd see, CBD products, and then, the FDA sent warning letters to these companies saying, whoa, despite what the 2018 Farm Bill did, these are not approved products. From our perspective, what you're doing is illegal, and that's created a whole number of challenges in the industry.
So where do we stand? Because it seems like there's mixed messages then between the federal government and all the states that are legalizing it, or legalizing different parts of it. Where do we stand today, and where's it going?
I do think it's probably a matter of time before the federal government changes its position. I think we're still probably at least 3 or 4 years from that. But where we stand today is marijuana is a Schedule I controlled substance. It is federally illegal. There are the vast majority of states have legalized cannabis to some extent. most states for medicinal purposes under various programs, but the extent to which it's legalized is in those states varies dramatically. So for some states, you can only get it if you have certain qualifying conditions, and those qualifying conditions are very limited, and it can be a challenge to get a effectively kind of, I won't call it a prescription because prescriptions are federally regulated, but the equivalent of a prescription from a doctor to be able to go purchase marijuana in those states. There are a number of other states like California, like Oregon, like Washington, where adult use for recreational purposes has been legalized. But operating in the context of, okay, it's legal within my state, but it's federally illegal, creates a whole number of challenges. So, you absolutely cannot ship product over state lines. Now you're getting into interstate commerce. The federal government's going to take note of that. But in terms of where we stand now, it's important to understand. A couple of years ago, before Jeff Sessions was our Attorney General, we had something that is commonly referred to as the Cole Memo. The Department of Justice had issued this guidance memo, effectively to the industries and the federal prosecutors that in short said, "Hey, it's our position that cannabis is illegal. However, in terms of enforcement priorities and allocating enforcement dollars, we're really only going to go after those companies that are operating in states without a robust regulatory environment and are also violating certain enforcement priorities that we have. And some of those enforcement priorities were, don't sell to kids, don't be trafficking in other drugs. So that was in place for a while, and a lot of participants in the industry got very comfortable of, okay, I get it. I just need to adhere to these enforcement priorities, and the federal government's not going to come after me. Jeff Sessions rescinded that. Rescinded that Cole Memo. So effectively, where we stand today is Sessions, by rescinding the Cole Memo, gave power to all the federal prosecutors within the state to decide, whether they're going to go after, participants in the industry. I think in a state like California, where we've got a fairly liberal population, it would be political suicide for a federal prosecutor to decide to go after, folks who are engaged in commercial cannabis activities, assuming that they're complying with state and local regulations. In states like Texas, it's different, but it's left to the discretion of the federal prosecutors, which leads to a lot of ambiguity.
And so let's talk a little bit about your client, because your clients, and then we'll kind of circle back there, because that's a really, really fascinating point to me. For the reason that you would think a federal prosecutor, an AUSA, an assistant U.S. attorney, would not particularly be subject to political pressure, say, because they're I suppose they're not really, it's not really a political job. They're I suppose their boss is appointed by the President of the United States, but you would think that they would be kind of independent of that, and that would make, I think, clients pretty nervous. Your clients extremely nervous because of personnel changes within the U.S. Attorney's Office. That just because of the whim of some fella who's coming in here, we're going to have to change. We're going to have to change things. Is that kind of what I'm? And I asked an original question and I completely changed it. But yeah, I'll let you talk. And by the way, you're listening to. Sorry, I need to do this. I get to do this. You're listening to JP, Kathy, and the Crew Network. You can see them between 7:30 and 9, Monday, Wednesday, Fridays. You're watching The Lawyer Show. You can watch us between 12 and 1 Central Time every Thursday. Okay, sorry, Josh, I cut you off. Go.
All right. Well, if I remember, you were a prosecutor, so you could probably speak to this a little bit better than I can. But no, I don't think it's quite like that. I think to the extent that discretion is given to the prosecutors in the state, if you think about, if you're a prosecutor, who you're going to go after, are you really going to allocate your time and resources to go after the companies that are, doing what they can to operate legally, at least within the state and in accordance with local regulations? Or are you going to go after those that are, those that are either operating in the black market or are completely disregarding state and local regulations? So I think in terms of, what makes sense as a prosecutor to allocate time and money to. You're probably going to go after the more egregious violations. So, it's still, even though that Cole memo that I referred to was rescinded, I do think it continues to serve as some practical guidance in terms of, all right, realistically, for a number of years, these were the enforcement priorities. These were the things that the federal government viewed as really bad. If I'm a federal prosecutor and I've got discretion in terms of how to, prosecute something, what's the easier case? Certainly going after people operating in the black market. Certainly going after unlicensed operators, much easier case, and probably in terms of kind of internal dynamics. And I don't know what kind of messages are given internally at the prosecutor's office here in California. But my guess is that directions have effectively been given.
See.
Hands off those that are doing everything they can to comply, those that are paying their taxes, things like that.
Well, and I'll tell you right now, I think I have some prosecutors who watch this show, and everything they do makes sense, and they're always reasonable, and they're always very, very well thought out on what they want to do. And by all means, I don't want them to stop.
How do you have a job then, Jeremy?
Thank you. Yes, no, that's right. No, I mean they need to be prosecuting rich people with money. That to me is what makes. I say that's not a very funny joke, but in reality, I mean, there's a old lawyer proverb: a person who sues your client can't be all bad, right? So anyway, I want to talk a little bit about your clients. Not,
all right.
You don't have to tell us like who they are necessarily, obviously, but talk about how sophisticated they are. Talk about whether or not they listen to their lawyer. Talk about some of the challenges that they have. Are these bigger companies, medium companies, small companies? Tell us a little bit about who your clients are and how they operate. I mean, what are they doing?
It ranges a huge range. I mean, I represent entrepreneurs who have some capital who are saying, I want to go start a cannabis business, and I guide them through the process of incorporation and getting licenses. And here in Los Angeles, we've got a social equity program, and so there's license priority for folks who have been bore the brunt of at least what we described as our oppressive historical drug enforcement programs. So it ranges from folks like that to fairly large public companies that are listed on the CSE up in Canada, who have a market cap of several $100 million, who use proceeds of money that they raise, capital that they raise in Canada to make acquisitions of U.S. companies. So it really ranges all over the place. I don't do quite as much with cultivators. I do a lot with product manufacturers, some retail dispensaries, but it's really pretty broad based. In terms of sophistication, I think what you'll find, unfortunately, is that a lot of these companies aren't nearly as sophisticated as your traditional public companies. Some of that is forced on them. I mean, if you've got to figure out how you're going to move cash around, just having the types of internal controls that are imposed upon you by, the SEC and the NASDAQ here, it's just hard to comply with that. And these companies are doing what they can, but it's a challenge. I think the companies that I've seen that are the most successful in some of these larger public companies in Canada typically have a group of folks who really understand the product, have been familiar with it for quite some time, and then also bring in kind of a finance team who helps figure out, well, how do we actually run a corporation? If we're going to enter into contracts, what's best practices? And those are the companies that I think have, a fairly good recipe for success. But it ranges, and even those public companies where you look at, you go, gee, it seems like I recognize that name. That's a household name in cannabis since there is one. I go in their shops. It looks like the Apple Store of cannabis.
Mm-hmm.
They must have their ducks in a row. Not so. There's a lot of which look, I think means that there's a lot of opportunity for new entrants into these markets. The sophistication is not nearly at the level of kind of traditional public companies. Some are relatively sophisticated, and some just aren't sophisticated at all. And look, we're dealing with, to the extent that it's someone who's got a lot of experience in the industry. And again, this is something that we had to grapple with as a law firm. We got into it, which was, okay, if we are going to be working with someone and they seem like they know what they're doing, odds are that they were probably very comfortable breaking the law for an extended period of time, right? We have a very, as lawyers, maybe not you, Jerry, I don't know as a criminal defense lawyer, but I'm fairly risk averse. I think lawyers in general are fairly risk averse. We're dealing with a clientele, even though I traditionally represent a lot of entrepreneurs in the tech industry, I mean, the comfort level with risk in the cannabis space is tremendous. So you're dealing with people when you kind of give them the background, you say, here's the legal parameters, here's the risk that you're taking if you do X, here's the risk that you're doing if you're taking Y. They are very comfortable taking the chances on things. And there are situations where we say, look, I think you're crossing a line that we just won't be comfortable as a law firm continuing to represent you. And we've had to end engagements when that comes up.
So okay, and does that happen then a bit? I mean, do you run into some clients who are just too fast and loose, given the area that you're in, to where you're going to say, look, you're on your own?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. You run into that all the time, and that's part of our intake process. There's a lot. We've got a different procedure for intake of cannabis clients. Full criminal background checks. We go through a committee. So yes, we do that. But some of the risk is being forced on these companies by virtue of the federal government's policies, and so I can't necessarily fault someone for saying, I'm just not going to do what you're telling me to do, Josh. I'm going to do it this other way. I think the odds of me getting in trouble are fairly limited. So yeah, we have that situation fairly frequently. But I mean, I'll give you a couple of examples. I mean, taxation for cannabis companies is oppressive. And the reason for that is that there is a provision of the Internal Revenue Code, it's section 280E. And what 280E effectively says is if you are trafficking in a Schedule I controlled substance, you have to report all of your income to the IRS, but you can't take your ordinary deductions, your operating expenses as deductions. It does allow you to deduct the cost of goods sold. So, if you look at, let's just say you're operating a t-shirt shop, and I'll use like simple numbers, right? You go and you open up this t-shirt shop and you have $1 million in sales, and let's just assume that your only two expenses are acquiring, t-shirts, which you pay $100,000 for, so that's cost of goods sold. But you also pay your employees $300,000 a year, and you pay rent of $200,000 a year. So realistically, at $1 million in, and you've got $600,000 of expenses. But if you're running a t-shirt shop, you can deduct those expenses and pay tax on the net. But effectively, for a cannabis company, you're paying tax on the gross. The IRS is going to say, we'll let you deduct $100,000 for acquiring the t-shirts, but your rent and your salaries to your employees, not going to happen. So you got to pay tax on the full $1 million, even though you paid out $600,000 in expenses. And that means that your net tax rate can be, 75% as a cannabis company. I mean, it's wildly oppressive. So you get into situations where you're chatting with a client, you say, well, understand how you've got to kind of report to the IRS and pay your taxes. And I, unfortunately, sometimes you hear back, well, good luck to the IRS figuring out, how much I've actually made, given that this is a cash-based business.
Yeah.
And at that point, from my perspective as a law firm, we're not going to take that risk. But there are plenty of people, I think, who are, unfortunately.
Yeah, the IRS tends to get what they want.
They do tend to get what they want, and that is one of the biggest challenges.
Yeah, and
the
well,
the IRS has been fairly aggressive.
And take in a client who's going to be fast and loose like that, I could definitely see a law firm saying, yeah, no, again, to go back to the theme of the day, the juice isn't worth the squeeze for us either, and so for us, and in like a criminal case, there's provisions in our engagement agreements that say, look, if you don't listen to me, after a while, I may cut you loose, and again, at the end of the case, they go to prison. I don't, and probably nothing really, and none of my conduct is ever really going to change that or get me into hot water. But I don't need the headache. I mean, I don't need to. I don't want to have to explain myself to a judge or to ethics committee or a federal or state agency. Does the state of California hit them for taxes too?
State of California hits them for taxes. Every state. I mean, there are excise taxes on cannabis in California. So yes, you add the federal and the state, and it gets pretty high. I think the federal government's perspective is, number one, this is federally illegal, so we feel justified in enforcing 280E in the way that we have. And number two, we think the vast majority of these companies are probably underreporting given the cash base. So it all evens out. I don't think they'll say it out loud, but I think that's their perspective. But yeah, there are additional taxes in California. We love to tax California. So
Are these companies cash based because credit card companies don't want to work with them?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep, they are cash based because credit card companies don't want to work with them, and in part, and it's tough to get a banking relationship. And even if you have a banking relationship, that doesn't mean that the counterparty to a contract has a banking relationship. So I may, if I'm a distributor, I may not have a bank account, but my uh, you know, I'm getting it backwards, but you may be in a situation where one party has to pay in cash, even though the other side has a bank account, and then that party is going to pay in cash. The counterparty is going to accept the cash deposit in the bank account, and then the bank is going to file suspicious activities reports, which are the reports that they need to file with the financial regulators to report, hey, we accept the cash in excess of a certain amount, and we've done our due diligence on this. I think it's compliant with law. So even those companies that do have banking relationships, they're still dealing a good deal in cash because counterparties that they're dealing with don't have banking relationships.
So take us through how how a legal one works. I mean, and I'll tell you this much. I mean, I was watching television. I don't know. I watch a lot of television. Play a lot of video games. Waste mental chewing gum, waste a lot of time doing various things. But watching a TV show on the cannabis industry, and I mean, it is such a radical contrast when you see people in lab coats with really high-speed technology in these greenhouses, right? That look like, it looks like a PBS special. And you contrast that with, people in body armor and Kevlar with little lights on their head kicking down doors, and you just look at it in a different light, and it just seems, it just it seems so radically different. Just that part, but talk about how a marijuana or a cannabis talk about how it works. Talk about how it gets from farm to market, because I think that's probably what a lot of Texas people who don't want to admit that they're for legalization on the JP and Kathy and Crew Network, who you can watch between 7:30 and 9, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. You're watching The Lawyer Show between 12 and 1 every Thursday. Talk to us about how it works. Talk to us about the big picture. And I'm assuming you're representing different all different parts of this chain, but go ahead and take us through that.
Well, unfortunately, there's no single answer to this question because it is heavily dependent on which state you're in. I mean, every state has a different regulatory environment, and so, for instance, there are some states where you have to have what we call a vertically integrated operation, which means you are your own cultivator, distributor, and retailer. Other states like mine, like California, where that's not the case, and so you can have a separate cultivator, you can have a separate distributor, and it goes through a traditional supply chain, just as if you were to grow corn or cotton. But actually moving product through the supply chain does get a little bit more complicated. So pretty much every state that is legalized has basically said, all right, we're going to legalize it, but we need to be able to track cannabis plants throughout the supply chain. And so what they effectively do, in California, we use something called Metric, which is a computer program that we use for our in some states it's called seed to sale, in some states it's called track and trace. But it's basically a barcoding system and a way to track a cannabis plant throughout the supply chain. So every cannabis plant and then when it gets harvested and dried out, it gets scanned again, and then when it goes to distributor, scanned again. Um, and so it's similar to the supply chain that you get for traditional agricultural products. There's just a lot more um, regulatory red tape that you've got to go through, and part of that is there's testing along the way, and cannabis is tested to make sure in different states for different reasons. Some it's tested in part for THC content, tested to see if there were pesticides used in growing it, and so if there's a product recall, it gives the state the ability to kind of enforce that throughout the supply chain. Also, if it determines that one party in the supply chain was operating without a license, it gives them the ability to kind of track where all the products went and get it back. So in short, it varies state by state. In terms of kind of getting a business up and running, I could speak to California, but again, it varies state to state. Where California has basically said, okay, we are going to legalize both medicinal and recreational cannabis use. But if you want to be in this space, we are going to allow each city, and for those unincorporated cities, the county, to decide whether and to what extent they want to allow cannabis operations within their borders. So there are a number of counties and cities in California that have said, we don't want it here, right? And you can't get a license in those states. There are others that have said, we would love the tax revenue. Come here, we'll tax the heck out of you. We'll charge you all sorts of fees to get a licenses, but we're going to license a lot of operators. There are others that have said, you know what, we'll allow one dispensary here. And how they allocate that is anyone's guess. But my speculation is that there's probably some cash being traded under the table in some of those jurisdictions. But that's generally how it works here. Now, to get a license in California, you apply. The state won't give you a license unless you can show that you've got a permit or a license from the city. The city won't give you one, and the state won't give you one unless you can show, for instance, if you are a dispensary, that your landlord is allowing you to do, to have cannabis operations on your property. So there's just a lot of mechanics that go into it, but it does vary state to state. California has I would say, fairly robust regulatory environment, although I can't say that we enforce it all that well. But there are there's a lot of red tape that goes into getting these licenses and getting a business up and running.
So you've used that term now several times, robust regulatory apparatus, scheme?
Enforcement environment.
Enforcement environment. Man, see, you're like a lawyer. I mean, you very precise words, and they mean something, right? So are you saying that, and you kind of related that back several different ways. You said that, U.S. attorneys from different areas are going to look, and you also sounded like that's part of the banking regulations, right? That the banks are going to have to make sure that there's a robust. You already just said it, and I'm gonna botch it again.
I used to say robust regulation.
That's why I represent users, and you represent
right.
the man. But that's okay. But so, are you saying that, like, if Idaho, and I don't, not to knock Idaho, I have no clue if they've got how their regulation.
Yeah.
Are you saying that there's something to the sophistication of the state in relationship?
From a policy level and enforcement perspective, that's kind of the terminology that's historically been used. I don't know that I can point you to a situation where, even when we had what I referred to previously, the Cole memo, which was the policy memo that talked about, the federal government's going to allocate enforcement dollars to only go after those companies that violate these enforcement priorities. I don't know, and I don't think that they ever identified a particular state and said, no, we don't think they satisfy the criteria of a robust regulatory environment. So, they use it, and frankly, I think that language is in large part there to give the federal government to know, you can always fall back on, well, we're going after these guys because XYZ state just isn't enforcing its regulations or didn't address such and such, and therefore we feel the need to step in.
Okay.
So I think that terminology is used more, in reference to kind of guidance rather than in practice that the federal government has said, California, we get it, you've adopted regulations, but we don't think they're robust. It's possible that they've reached that determination. I have not heard that.
And there was a 60-minute story on the California cannabis industry. I'm assuming you saw it. Um,
I did not.
no, and so and I saw it, and I watched with much interest, and then I promptly forgot it because I saw a shiny thing, or football was on television, something like that. How's it going? What challenges do they face? What challenges do these cannabis companies? What are they looking at? What's on
There,
their plate right
there's,
now?
there's, I mean, so we talked about a couple of them already. 280E, that Internal Revenue Code provision, huge challenge. Not being able to distribute products across state lines, big problem. So, you think of like, beer company, Budweiser. I mean, when you drink a Budweiser in California, it tastes the same as a Budweiser in New York or Texas, I assume. Um, but in when you can't ship products across state lines, even if you're using, let's just say, the same seed variety to grow your cannabis plants, there might be different lighting conditions, different humidity that could affect the flavor profile and the THC content of a plant. So it's very hard, when you're trying to build a national brand, to do so in cannabis, given that you've basically got to build from the ground up in every state that you want to be in. So that's a challenge. When companies get into financial trouble, bankruptcy is just not an option for cannabis companies because all bankruptcy is governed by federal law. So, and bankruptcy is really there for the protection of the debtor, right? Allow them to kind of restructure their debts and shield them from certain types of actions that a creditor might take. So from the federal government's perspective, it's kind of like, hey, creditors have at your debtor here. So when you run into financial troubles in the cannabis industry, it can be a huge challenge. Immigration, big challenge. Immigration, again, a federal issue. So if the immigration authorities get wind that you're involved in the cannabis industry, they may block, your travel to the U.S. I've actually got some clients who are overseas investors in the U.S. cannabis industry, and in California, anyone who is an investor in the cannabis industry needs to be disclosed to the regulators for licensing purposes. There's different levels of disclosure based on the type of investment you make and how much it is, but you are required to be disclosed. So their concern is, well, I've got $100,000 investment in a cannabis company, but I don't want that to preclude me from ever coming to the United States again. How do we get around that? And honestly, there are some limited ways. California, interesting enough, and I don't know whether or not this exists in many other states, has a provision in its cannabis regulations that basically says, well, as long as you own less than 20%, you can of a cannabis company, you don't need to be disclosed on the license application if you hold it through what we call blind trust, which is effectively what politicians use once they get into political office, and they're supposed to know, where the money is. So, we've seen some overseas investors form blind trust and appoint a third-party trustee to make investments for them in the hopes that that'll kind of keep them off the radar of the immigration authorities to not preclude them from being able to come to the states. But intellectual property protection is another big challenge. Patents are issued and trademarks are issued by the USPTO, which is a federal agency. So try to get a trademark on cannabis. It's pretty darn difficult, if not possible. Now you can get, if I own, Josh's cannabis company, I can't trademark the cannabis itself, the strain of cannabis that I'm selling, but I can, at least in our experience, trademark T-shirts that say Josh's cannabis company, because T-shirts are a legal product, and so so there is some challenges regarding intellectual property protection that you get into. Real estate is another big issue because of the banking overlap.
Mm-hmm.
So if I want to open up a dispensary and I find a landlord who's willing to lease the property to me, that landlord may have a mortgage on the property, and that mortgage almost certainly says property can't be used for illegal purposes. Probably a default under the mortgage, which the odds of your bank finding that out, when you sign the lease, pretty limited. Once your landlord goes to refinance that property, and now the bank does some due diligence, says we're not refinancing the property. Now you got a problem. So I mean, you get into all sorts of situations like that in the cannabis space, and I'm just constant headaches you got to navigate through in light of the the difference between it being at least in California, legal at the state level and at the local level, but illegal at the federal level.
Well, it's just tragic that all of your clients have there's so many stress points that just go in so many different directions, and it's just horrible that they have to pay you money to advise them on all these intricate things that you know inside and out, and hopefully pay your entire hourly rate.
Yeah, it's pretty unfortunate.
Yeah, that's just awful. But
I will tell you, like, I do have clients who say, "Hey, I get all these headaches, terrible, but we would not have been able to get in this industry if we didn't have this structure right now, because we were able to start our business with $100,000 and grow somewhat slowly. The reason why you're not seeing kind of the Philip Morrises of the world get in right now is because they've got all these other business divisions, and they don't want to run the risk of, well, what happens if the federal government, comes after us? So, yes, you've got all these headaches, but there are some operators who I think take the view that, well, I'll deal with those for now because it's created an environment that I can compete in and at least get the scale before I've got, the Walmarts of the world selling marijuana, and it's hard for me to compete with pricing with a Walmart. So I don't know. There are some perks to it. There's some people who look at it glass half full, I suppose. I think one of the big and one of the real unfortunate things, and I think California is a prime example of this, is that even for those companies that say, okay, great, I'm glad that I don't have to compete with these big guys. I want to do everything right. I want to set up a proper company. I'm going to pay my taxes the right way. I'm going to, disclose all my financial interest holders to the regulators. They're big challenges because we just don't have the resources to enforce the laws the way that we should. You've got a tremendous black market here. And so, yes, these guys don't need to compete with, the Walmarts of the world and the Philip Morrises, but they've got to compete with these illegal growers and illegal, sellers who are undercutting them by pricing because they don't need to deal with 280E. They don't need to pay taxes to the IRS.
They need to, but they don't.
Yeah.
They don't.
And they don't need to pay. They don't need to pay. Josh Schneiderman to tell them how to do it right. They are, perfectly happy, operating the way that they are.
And so basically, what you see is no good deed goes unpunished. These companies who come to you, they want to do it correctly. They want, they're buying into the enforcement regulation. They want to come by their business honestly. They want to grow their business in a way. And you also said that some of the money comes, you were saying, from Canada or from bigger companies. These are groups that following the law is important to them. And when they follow the law, because of just the degree of control and regulation, that it can be a little bit strangulating. And then on the other end, then they're competing with the black market guys. Yeah. And you probably have clients who are kind of in that zone that, well, we're gonna comply as best we can, but man, maybe we're just gonna go back to the good old days.
Well, no. Once they decide they're going to go back to the good old days, that's the end of our.
Right. No, that's what I mean. But no, I don't mean that you advised them on how to go back to. Yeah.
My clients are complying, and they are, for the most part, complaining about how oppressive it is, and it's a real challenge for them. I mean, their hope is, and they're putting pressure on the regulators, saying, regulators, here we are complying, but this isn't fair, right? We're paying taxes, we're doing all these compliance things. We're investing a whole bunch of money in security and IT infrastructure to comply with your track and trace requirements, but we've got to compete with these guys over here who are smuggling stuff in from Mexico, or the state of Oregon, which is relatively easy to procure compared to other states, easy to procure licenses in, and is producing products at a rate that's much greater than they can consume in the state, and it's flooding the market here in California, so illegally crossing state borders. But when it's being sold on the black market, you got to compete with people who are just dumping excess supply. Man, it's tough. And so my clients are of the view and are lobbying the regulators, like, come on, let's allocate some money to going after these guys.
You're watching JP, Kathy, and the Crew Network. You can watch JP, Kathy, and the Crew between 7:30 and 9, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. I'm Jeremy Rosenthal. You're watching The Lawyer Show. We're on between 12 and 1. Let's pick up right there on Thursdays. Let's pick up right there on that point. How much, let's say the federal government comes in, reclassifies, just sort of cleans up, some of the marijuana laws and regulations. Let's just say they legalize it, right, within certain parameters, of course. How much does that clean it up? Because does that help alleviate with, like you were saying, the trademark? Does that help alleviate banking? Does that help alleviate the immigration and a lot of these different areas that seem to be problematic for no other reason than you have this stress between state and federal law?
I think it alleviates a ton. I think that would make a huge difference. I do think that they need to address it comprehensively, because I think when we passed the 2018 Farm Bill that legalized hemp, I think it was done I just don't think enough thought was given to, well, how does what we're doing here relate to other areas? How does it relate to the FDA's position with respect to CBD? And so when we say legalize, yes, I think reclassifying it and not having it be a Schedule 1 controlled substance will do a ton. It will eliminate the bankruptcy problem. It will enable you to get IP protection. It will, assuming that we solve the FDA problem, it will no longer, for your landlord, it will no longer be an illegal activity that would trigger a default under the mortgage. So it would solve a lot. It would also allow you to build these kind of national brands, because you'd be able to distribute products across state lines. So I think you'd see it go to a much more of a traditional industry.
And it would bring
pretty dramatically to do that.
It would help bring the people that you want into the fold, because isn't the whole point legalize it and tax it, and then legalize it and clean it up, regulate it to the degree that, like alcohol, highly regulated. Yeah.
Yep.
So you would think that marijuana would be as well, but if you eliminate a lot of those stress points, you want more people to come in and comply and pay taxes. And
oh, absolutely, yep. I think you'd solve a ton of those problems, and yet you don't see a lot of beer or whiskey bootleggers anymore. Partly because it's you've set up a system where it's not so oppressively expensive to operate that you can have an efficient market, and it's just not lucrative to operate in the black market. So yeah, I think that's key. I just don't know that we've got the political willpower under, certainly not under the current administration. I do think if you were to see the executive branch flip and the Senate flip, there is a possibility under the next administration that we see a change. I don't know if we get Trump, if Trump is reelected, I'm not, I wouldn't put money on this changing in the next 4 years. And even if there is a change in the administration and the Senate flips, I think it'll take a little bit of time before they really kind of do their homework and say, okay, we're really going to do this and think through it in the proper way.
Has Barr, Attorney General Barr, has he weighed in on this? What's he think?
Well, Sessions rescinded the Cole memo. Barr is more friendly to the industry than Sessions was. He's had some commentary in passing that kind of gives you the comfort level regarding kind of enforcement priorities a little bit more in line with where they were pre-Jeff Sessions. But I can't recall anything definitive that he said. I don't envision him kind of reinstating the Cole memo, but he's made some comments that have basically made you believe that he's certainly more friendly to the industry than Jeff Sessions is.
So, and I want the viewers at home, we got to wrap this up. We've got about a minute left. But I want the viewers at home to see that basically what's happening is all my work is going to you, because I've made traditionally, I hate saying it, but it's true, I make a lot of money on the fact that marijuana is illegal in Texas. People have to come and hire me to get them out of a legal jam. I tell clients all the time, look, man, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years from now, they may think of you as the Johnny Appleseed or the Johnny Apple weed. You may be a patriot or a pioneer or some whatever, but today it's illegal. Okay, you know, and so, but that's kind of the motion. That's kind of the motion of the ocean. That this is sort of the way that it's going. So we've got about 30 seconds now. Commercials. Oh, by the way, the Dodgers are in town here in Texas. How crazy is that? That I might be able to watch the Dodgers in the playoffs and you can't. It'd be nice if the Rangers were.
Big night tonight. Yeah, we got Lakers may win the championship tonight, and we got the Dodgers who are looking really good, and super strange that other teams are at Dodger Stadium now. So it's just.
There it is, man. Yeah, well, we've got a lot of sports baggage.
I think we got the Astros here.
Oh yeah, you can have them. We've got a lot of sports baggage in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex. We have a lot of complexes about the Cowboys, the Mavericks. The Stars just lost the Stanley. I mean, we're glad they made it. I don't watch. I'm not a big hockey guy, but any last plugs? Any last thing our audience should know? When Texas does legalize this, is Snell and Wilmer and Josh Schneiderman, are you going to be able to, in your firm, are you going to be able to advise people lawfully here in the state of Texas when they open the Josh Schneiderman branch in Dallas?
We as a law firm, I think we would love to expand to Texas at some point if the right opportunity arose. It fits within our geographic platform. We've got offices throughout the Western U.S. and Mexico. We're in California, Nevada, Arizona, Washington, Colorado, Utah, Oregon. So Texas is a logical next step for us. So we'd like to get there if the right opportunity arose. For now, no, we're limited to advising companies in the states that we operate in. But if folks who are listening want to chat with me about kind of federal law in general or what's happening in the states that we're in, they can reach out again. It's Josh Schneiderman at Snell and Wilmer. You can email me. It's jschneiderman@swlaw.com.
All right. Well, I think that wraps up this episode of The Lawyer Show. And man, this has been a lot of fun, and it's been a lot of fun learning about this. So, all right. Take care.
Hey, thanks, Jeremy. This has been a ball.
We'll see you around. Bye-bye.